Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me here. It's such an honor, a pleasure, a joy to be with you. I want to thank especially to Professor Jennifer Chun, who is the connection that made possible for me to be here. And I have to share and disclaim that Jennifer is my mentor. She was my supervisor when I was doing my MA in Canada, and she is the one that always brought me to have existential and strategic inquiry about organizing, why we do this. So thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much to Saba and to Diane, Catherine, to Katja, and also want to recognize Yesenia. She is an affiliated to IDWF, an organizer of UDW here, and also with my co-fellow organizer, Lorena, which we are going to share the panel together. It's been a really nice process to be thinking about what it will be more useful to share about the struggle of domestic workers with you all. So with that, let's start. So the title says From the Margins to the Center. And I don't want you to believe that domestic workers right now have all the rights, that their lives have changed. No, that is still the struggle. But when I mean from the margins to the center is that before, domestic work and domestic workers were not even in the conversation of labor for so long. It was unthinkable 20, 30, 50 years ago to think that domestic workers will have a global union federation and that they will be negotiating policy, international policy and local policy at the table. Not someone negotiating for them, not a technical staff person in the union, but themselves being informed by the lived experience and challenging a lot of what we think, who should be at the table, who should be speaking about what. So this is when I said from the margins to the center, is that they have positioned themselves in the labor agenda and in the feminist agenda. Doesn't mean that their lives have changed. The struggle still continues, but now the conversations of domestic work are there. And this morning I've heard 2-3 presentations or 4 presentations about domestic workers. Like seriously, like 30 years ago, there was very few research studies about domestic workers. In the 80s, like a few anthropologists started to talk about domestic workers, and now I see in academia, lots of academics and a lot of graduate students interested in this. So that is what it means also from the margins to the center in different levels of the struggle. So with that caveat, as Catherine said, it is a global union federation that was founded in 2013, 11 years old. Today we represent 90 unions in 70 countries. We keep growing more and more. And the main goal of the domestic workers 11 years ago was to build a strong, democratic, and united domestic workers global organization to protect and advance the domestic workers' rights everywhere. Because injustice and oppression, it lives everywhere in different forms, from the Americas to the Middle East, from North America to South Africa. So their dream was and is bold. So where and who are the domestic workers? This is like just a quick picture about, there are 6 million domestic workers, 13 of them are migrant domestic workers, 70% in a global average are women, but if we go to some countries, it's 95%. Like in my country, in Bolivia, it's 95%. If we go to national statistics, it's more. But globally speaking, 76 of them are women, and they account for the 25% of the global workforce in the care economy. So they are the main ones that provide direct and indirect care. So care and domestic work, very briefly, it's a condition of life. Nobody could survive from day one without care, and nobody could die without care. From womb to tomb, we need care. We are all connected through care. And as I said, can be paid or unpaid, can be direct or indirect, and also involves close relationships at the level of the household. And sometimes these relationships this work can happen through close relationships or not. So in the movement, we say that domestic work is the work that makes all other work possible. Nobody could go outside the house if you don't have somebody that is taking care of your children, or somebody that is taking care of your elderly parents, or if your kids do not have food, or if nobody has prepared food for them. We will just all stay home, right? So that's we say it's the work that makes all other work possible. Some people say that we need roads to go to work, and many people say I need a domestic worker in order to go to work. So, but despite of being so essential, why is so undervalued and why it's been so invisible for so many years? So, domestic work is unrecognized and undervalued, as in introduction it says. It was always been considered just part of women's role, an extension of our duties because our gender. So then, why paying them? Why recognizing them? Why recognizing their skills if this is what you have to do because you are a woman, right? So patriarchy, colonialism, it's what basically has pushed domestic work to be invisible. And this is what we're trying to recover from colonialism and patriarchy. And this is no more, no less, the fight of the domestic workers. It's challenging this. And it's challenging this everywhere, in academia, in the labor movement, in the feminist movement, at the level of policies, at the level of the discourse, at the level of the very basic relationships between the employer and the domestic worker, at the level of the household where no one sees what's happening. So that is what it means. So domestic work lives at the intersection of class, race, gender, ethnicity, and migration. Interlocking systems of oppression conspire on an everyday basis for domestic workers to be completely undervalued and invisible. Sorry, this is in Spanish and Portuguese, but basically it's like sexism, the sexual division of labor, the racial division of labor, racism, the social inequality, discrimination in the labor market, and how all that also it gets entrenched with class. So this is the circle, right? This is why the fight and the articulation of the analysis of the oppression of domestic workers, when they speak on those terms, they cannot think on themselves as women. They think on themselves as Black women, as indigenous women, and as migrant women, because race, class, and gender and immigration status are just like entrenched part of their identities and their place in society and the place in the labor market and the place of their destiny. We see a lot of intergenerational in organizing and also oppression in the domestic workers, because the grandmother was a domestic worker, the mother, the daughter, and very likely the next generation will be, because of these oppressions of class, race, and gender. So what is the situation of human and labor rights of domestic workers? As in the previous slide I said, this is, it lives at the intersection of so many oppressions. So it is the sector with the highest deficit of decent working conditions. Decent working conditions is a very ILO language, International Labour Organization language, but basically means labor rights, basic labor rights, like, for example, a contract, a minimum wage, recognition of you as a worker in the labor law in your country. So not having that, not having access to social protection, social security, that is lack of decent working conditions. So it is the highest percentage of deficit of decent working conditions is found in the domestic work sector. Also is one of the top 5 occupations that has the highest percentage of forced labor and child labor. And globally speaking, the wages of domestic workers are between 45-50% less than any other worker in any other occupation. This isn't a global average, but if we go to country or regional levels, even higher. In many places, in many regions, there is no even like wages in terms of like financial remuneration. It's just board and room. But this is in a global average. In general, also there is exclusion from labor laws. in theory and in practice. And globally speaking, 81% of them are excluded from social protection. But if we go again to national and regional percentage, we have the lack of inclusion into social security, which puts them in informality of conditions. It's 98%, 95%, but this is in a global average, keeping and taking into account Europe, for example, where there are more laws and regulations. So this is who domestic workers are, how many they are, where they are. So now what I am always more excited about is to talk about their resistance and their struggle. So there is about 100 years of organized grassroots organizing of domestic workers. In some regions, the struggle of domestic workers, the organized struggle of domestic workers is older than in others. In this region, in the Latin American region, we can find the first unions in 1935, in 1936, and the founders of those unions are Black women, indigenous women. So that's why here in the first picture there is the picture of Doña Laudelina Blanco de Melo. She was the Black domestic workers in Brazil that founded the first union in the 1936, and she was part of the clandestine Black Communist Party in Brazil, and she was a domestic worker, and she founded the first union. The second one is Doña Petronila Infante in Bolivia, an indigenous Aymara woman that also she was the founder of the first domestic workers union. And the last picture is our Congress, IDWF Congress in South Africa. So as you see, I'm talking about Black women, indigenous women, and this is what I call them. This is why I call them some of the first intersectional feminists. Because in the 1930s, they started to talk about a feminist labor agenda without having the name of a feminist labor agenda, but that's what it was. And they were starting to organize around race, class, and gender, and ethnicity. So, and sometimes we think that feminism comes from Europe, you know, Simone de Beauvoir. No, it's coming from the domestic workers in many, many locations, and it will be so good to map out the history of them in different regions. So they bring class, race, and gender into their analysis and into their fight. Domestic workers' unions do not organize only around improving wages, around having contracts. They organize around better life conditions because of their race, gender, and ethnicity. The grassroots of organizing of domestic workers, as I started to talk, it's a historical struggle that preludes what we know of grassroots organizing today. It's the first experience of trying to organize the unorganized. Why the unorganized? Maybe organizers in the room have always heard we need to organize the unorganized. Who is the unorganized? It's workers that do not fall into industrial relations, workers that are not even considered workers, workers that are atomized and alone, working in isolation. They are not in a factory, they are not all together. It's difficult to organize. So this is the unorganized or unorganizable. And domestic workers did it. Historically, as I said, they have been considered not real workers because they are not doing real work. So why organizing them? And trade union comrades, male comrades, I don't think they have thought in organizing the unorganized. It just never occurred to them because domestic work, it is just something that they take it for granted, right? So this is what they have been challenging even to their male union counterparts. Historically, domestic workers, the sector never had and doesn't have the two traditional weapons of a struggle for a working class, for a union, which is the right to strike, right? And the collective bargaining. They don't have that yet. They have accomplished so much. They have accomplished visibility, laws, and in many instances, implementations of those laws. So the domestic workers back in 1930s, they started with very basic premises that today we take it for granted. The first one is that domestic work is work, and that they are workers. They are not servants, they are not helpers, they are not assistants, they are workers. Therefore, they deserve rights and recognition, and they deserve to be named in the labor codes, in the protections, and they deserve social security. They are not poor women, that they are coming from the countryside or from another country and we just have to give them charity. They are workers, and guess what? Their work is essential. This is knowledge that it was not knowledge for us. This is the knowledge that they brought to us, and this is enlightening to so many feminist scholars today. So, and with that also came the reivindication that we need to formalize these employment relationships. And this is the hardest part. Not only bringing legislation will formalize an employment relationship, because very much it is in the colonial mentality and also in the relationships, the one-to-one, in the interpersonal relationships. So the fight of the domestic workers is at the level of changing legislation, but is also changing mindsets and changing culture and changing cultures of oppression. So that is why it's so long and so difficult, and this is why our strategies need to be different, need to be very innovative, because we do not face an organized, mobilized opposition. Like, for example, when you think on factory workers and you think in maquiladoras, you will think that, of course, the owners of the maquiladora that are in Finland or in Japan will, of course, try to shut down the strike. With domestic workers, that's not the case. Everybody is an employer of a domestic worker. Even union leaders, even the legislators, everybody is an employer of a domestic worker. Do they recognize themselves as employers of domestic workers? Hardly so. So it is a multi-strategy of pushing for recognitions at the level of the law, but also changing the dynamics at this level of the interpersonal. So I think I'm gonna skip this one, but basically what I wanted to show you in this slide is when we think about unions and domestic workers unions, we're not talking about the unions that probably are in your head, that have a paid staff, that they work the whole day in the union. The union of domestic workers are the workers themselves, and in their free time, weekends or nighttime, they dedicate that time to their political life. They do not have offices, some of them they do, but usually they just gather in the garage or in the garden or in the patio of one of the union members. There is no, they don't have funding, they do not have a formal type of membership. The union density, it's very low, it's very hard to organize, house by house, one by one. Yeah, I think I'm gonna skip this part in the interest of time, but let's get to the ILO Convention C189, the decent work for domestic workers. So for the ones that are not familiar, this convention was adopted in 2011, and basically it seeks to ensure that domestic workers have conditions that are no less favorable than those normally applicable to other categories of workers. This is quoting from the convention. So basically defines basic labor rights and recognitions. It gives countries a floor from which they cannot go lower, they can go more, but no lower. So, but what it's very, very interesting, it's the history of the making of ILO Convention C189. So I will go into the history, how from not being recognized and visible, then they get to have an international labor convention, which is the highest international labor law. So there has been obviously an evolution of rights. And so they started to talk about, as I said, domestic work is work, and domestic workers are workers. And they have a lot of premises in their organizing. So I'm just like trying to analyze this phrase, domestic work is work, and what that meant in terms of changes. Changes, how it's been shifting power slowly for the domestic workers at the level of the discourse, at the level of the practice, and at the level of legislation. So when we talk about shifting power at the level of the discourse, it's when we say domestic workers work, is that domestic workers are recognized for their labor and that they are actual workers, and this work is skilled and you need knowledge. So it's bringing qualifications, it's bringing, it's putting at the level of a profession and not just as something that just because we're women, we know how to broom and cook from little. Also brings visibility and recognition of care work as first condition of life. And from being invisible, it reframes the work as an essential work. That's what we talk today when we talk about the care economy, and also challenges patriarchal and capitalist premises about the exploitation and exclusion. At the level of the praxis, also historically they have been not regarded as workers, but also tries to bring some level of formalization of employment conditions, and meaning between the employer and worker, not between the servant and the employer or the master. So it's decolonizing the minds of the employers and bringing this at the level of the practice. And at the level of the legislation, it means C189, it means Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights, it means minimum wage, it means inclusion into the social security, it means written contracts. So it shifts at the level of the legislation as well. So as I said before, domestic workers started to organize in the 1930s. So C189, it just doesn't happen since the 2000. And here I'm going to say something that probably it will contradict some things that you have read about C189. The building blocks of C189 started in the conversations with domestic workers in many countries and didn't start in Geneva. So the building blocks, it's been all these like 100 years of organizing of domestic workers. Some regions are have a longer history than other regions, but in general, there was organizing of domestic workers. So these building blocks have served first to instigate the discussion, and I will say even the idea to have a labor convention for domestic workers. Domestic workers have been trying to put this in the agenda of the governing body of the ILO. The governing body is employers, governments, and workers, and they all, the three parts need to agree on an agenda on what they are going to talk. They were trying to, it's hard to do this, they were trying to put this agenda for many years, but finally in 2005, the Latin American Confederation of Latin American and Caribbean Domestic Workers Confederation, they were getting better and better and getting alliances, and they had an important conversation with the women from the Americas, CCA, Confederación Sindical, the International Trade Union Organization, Confederation in the Americas, with the women's group. So basically they were appealing to the feminist trade unionists, and had a meeting in Montevideo, Uruguay, where it's known as the Montevideo Agreement, Montevideo Declaration, and the women from the International Trade Union Organization, they brought this into the agenda of the ITUC, and they started also to help domestic workers to put this in the agenda. And then 2010, they said, okay, we're going to be discussing this. So the idea was instigated by the workers themselves, and once they got the okay, this is going to be the agenda for 2010 and 11 in Geneva, then they started a whole mobilization in the different regions. This morning we have heard a panel of a graduate student that she was talking about how were the conversations in India? So domestic workers, they committed themselves to give examples, to give information. They mobilized knowledge, and they were giving to governments and trade unions to submit this information, because the process of the writing a convention in the ILO is that first you need to do a survey at the global level. How are the conditions of domestic workers? So it means that you need to give information. And there was no data, there was no information, because it wasn't no one's radar. So they started to produce this information and giving briefs to academics, to governments, to trade unions, so they could write, so the ILO can write what is called the white paper. This is the first draft that is going to be discussed with employers, workers, and governments. So they produce that information, and then they of course started to do advocacy, and they started to educate and to campaign to the governments to educate them and say, Ministry of Labor, you will go to Geneva in June, and we're going to be discussing about this, and we want you to know what's the condition of our sector here in Salvador, Guatemala, India, Taiwan, Korea, and they were briefing them and making them knowledgeable and sensitizing them to their conditions, so when they go to Geneva, they can vote in favor of this convention. So this case of how C-189 came about, it is really a story of from bottom up. It's the story of the domestic workers bringing all of them together. So this is why I called this transnationalization from below, and it challenges the notion that the global north gives and grants rights to the ones in the global south. It's the other way around. The global south is producer of rights and knowledge, and it makes it up to the top until it is finally recognized. In some countries, they have been more active than in others, but what followed after the adoption of this convention is the campaign for ratification. And the ratification, sometimes it will never happen in countries that are very authoritarian, or countries that they just think that they are better than everyone else, like the United States never likes to recognize ILO conventions. They don't ratify conventions because they don't want to be told what they have to improve. So there are countries that are never going to ratify these conventions. However, that doesn't stop to domestic workers to work towards an implementation of the principles of this convention. So how this manifests in the United States is the domestic workers' Bill of Rights. All right, even though they didn't ratify C-189, but every state is fighting for basic to be included in the labor code, and there are many methodologies in other countries on how to implement these conventions. So just go super quickly. This happened because they have different organizing models, power of self-political representation. Domestic workers were always committed that no one speaks for themselves, they speak for themselves. And even though when they had funders and other NGOs trying to help them, they were always committed to not fall into the trap of being beneficiaries and victims, but they always act with a lot of dignity and saying, we will do this, we need you, we want you on our side, but we are the workers that speak for ourselves. Different kinds of organizing models around class identity, around gender, around migration. Some of them have organizing unions, some of them in associations, and those are our strategies. They are the greatest one in making alliances, building with everyone, with academics, with labor union, with researchers, with stakeholders, with governments, with other movements. They always teach me a lot on how to bring everybody on the table, and they have long-time good friends everywhere. And of course, transnational organizing. They knew that the domestic workers in other parts of the globe, they were suffering same as them, because at the end, their oppression lives in their bodies, and we all have a body, and we all can relate to how it feels, oppression in our bodies, regardless of culture, regardless of language. So when they see each other, when they are together in one room, they don't need to start talking about. They know when they see each other, they know, they understand, because they live the same thing. So the transnational organizing aspect, it brought them to this really ambitious dream to have a global union federation, which is the one that we have today. The struggle still continues. There are a lot of lessons learned from the workers, what it means to be a worker-led, to have worker representation in practice, what it means to bring an intersectional feminist agenda, that it didn't end with C189. C189 was the beginning of the next convention, that is C190, which is to eliminate gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work, and then the general discussion on care economy, that all the governments now are talking about care economy, when before, 15 years before, they wouldn't even talk about, they wouldn't even know what care economy is. So they started to push a labor feminist agenda that it will continue in the years to come, because we have a lot of issues to fight for. Their history, yesterday we talked about the importance of history, how it's so valuable for our movement, because there is an intergenerational oppression and intergenerational power of the unions. When you have your great-great-grandmother, your grandmother, and you know that most likely your daughter is going to be a domestic worker, then you fight with a bigger passion and with a bigger vision. Power of intergenerational organizing, and the power of alliances building that are strategic, but also that are in the principle of solidarity. And more I see a lot of alliances with the transgender movement, disability rights movement. They understand oppression. You don't have to explain to them what is good or strategic. It's just like, we understand we have to fight together. So I think I passed my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was such an illuminating and inspiring presentation. Now I'd like to invite you and our two keynote panelists and our moderator up to take a seat up front, and I'll then give the introductions for all of you. So please, yes. SCME Local 3930 UDW for over 18 years. Yesenia is currently Director of Organizing and Member Engagement with the UDW. She has worked for the union representing caregivers in different capacities throughout the state of California. As a labor representative, she has negotiated contracts, organized workers, and mobilized union members during a number of campaigns over the years. Recently, she has been working to expand binational ties between the Mexican-American members of her union and the Mexican Domestic Workers Union in an effort to collaborate and gain strength on both sides of the border. De Casas is an immigrant from Mexico herself, where she was born and raised before she came to the US, and graduated with a BA in Communications from Cal State University, San Bernardino. Lorena Lopez Masumi is the organizing director at Unite Here Local 11, the hotel and restaurant workers union, which currently represents over 30,000 hospitality workers in Southern California and Arizona. For over 2 decades, Lopez has successfully campaigned throughout Southern California, and these campaigns have resulted in unionizing thousands of workers in the hospitality industry. Lopez has also led groundbreaking ballot initiative campaigns to protect workers against sexual harassment, to regulate workloads, and increase minimum wages. Welcome to both of our keynote panelists. Thank you. And to moderate this conversation and the Q&A that will follow, we are so grateful to have Saba Wahid. Wahid serves as the director of the UCLA Labor Center, following 11 years as its research director. A pioneering researcher with nearly 20 years of experience, she co-developed the Research Justice Framework and has led over 40 community-based studies focusing on diverse worker populations, including domestic workers, nail salon employees, gig workers, and young workers. Beyond her research, Wahid is an award-winning storyteller who co-produces the Rework podcast, blending her academic expertise with creative advocacy. Her experience includes roles at Data Center and the Urban Justice Center, and she holds an MA in Anthropology from Columbia University and a BA in English and Religious Studies from UC Berkeley. Welcome, Saba Wahid. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you to all the organizers of the conference. This has been amazing. Adriana, it is always so inspiring to hear you talk and just lay the foundation of women's work and women's activism for 100 years, that this has always been there. And I think that's such a theme that I heard in panels earlier. Like, we're talking about reclamation, we're talking about always having been here, and that we're demanding, we're not asking for these rights. And so kind of building off of, some of the stories you were telling, about rights production, changing minds, building from the bottom up, I wanted to pull in Yesenia and Lorena to give us a little bit of an opportunity to tell us a little bit about the work that they're doing. So if you could share a campaign or area of work that your organization is doing that highlights how you've been able to address women workers' needs. And we'd also like to hear, what does building a labor feminist agenda mean to you?
Well, thank you, everyone. It's so great to be here. Our union has a great relationship with UCLA. We have students working with us all the time, so we really appreciate everything that UCLA has done for the hotel and restaurant employees. Our union has for decades, similar to what Adriana said, our union, it's a worker-led movement where we represent an industry that, similar to the domestic workers, it's one that has discriminate against women. If you go to a hotel, it's the women that are assigned to clean the rooms, it's the women that are assigned to scrub the toilets, it's the women that are assigned to do the jobs that traditionally women have been told to do. If the men are the ones that carry the heavy things and do the managerial aspect of hotels, and over the years, housekeepers have led our union and changed that. One of the main issues that women in this industry have fought more recently, similar to what Adriana talked about, hotels did not have CalOSHA standards that were tailored for that work. Cleaning, it's a lot of repetitive motion injury that was just unknown to CalOSHA. Workers are injured. These industries built of women, waves of women coming to the hotel industry. Within years, waves of women are thrown out. Another wave of women come and thrown out with injuries because it's repetitive motion physical work. And multi-billionaires, Hilton, Marriott, Hyatt, are taking advantage of women in this industry. And so we, for over years, we built our own standards within CalOSHA, which is amazing. It was a groundbreaking campaign that made it visible within CalOSHA, the work of cleaning. More recently, women, before the Me Too movement, before the actresses came forward, housekeepers were talking about sexual harassment in hotels, where the power dynamics between the guest and a room attendant, and the horrific and scary experiences women face when they go inside a room in an industry that tends to ignore these women. So we recently passed, not recently, this is in 2013, I think, in Long Beach, an initiative where we require hotels. Women came forward, spoke about what happened, about the risks and the horrible sexual assaults that were happening, and women did not talk about it for fear of retaliation, termination. When women start organizing, they spoke about the problem, and we were able to require hotels to provide panic buttons so that when you go into a room, if you feel a sense of danger, you press that button and require the hotel to have a security guard at the door within seconds. If the woman makes a report, the hotel is required to call the police if she wants to make a police report against the guest. something that the industry was so opposed to. How can we criminalize our own guests, our own patrons? So because women have the courage to speak about harassment, we were able to make that not only a part of our contracts, but through ballot initiatives starting in Long Beach. The city of Long Beach expanded to Santa Monica, West Hollywood, Seattle, Chicago, New York, put regulation to empower women to come forward, and in addition to the panic buttons, call the police. If the person needed to be removed from the workplace and the work area, be allowed to do that. Many incidents, the hotels will just protect the guests. Those are just some examples of how crucial it is for workers to be the front center of any movement that makes real change.
Okay, hello, thank you for inviting me. I'd like to speak about who we are. First, the United Domestic Workers, you're probably wondering. And we are a labor union in California that represents caregivers. We represent about 110,000 caregivers throughout California. And as you asked the question, Saba, I was thinking I'm gonna speak about our recently organized unit of childcare workers. It took 15 years for childcare workers who take care of children that receive help, the parents that receive help for childcare, to get the right to collective bargain. These workers have been organizing. They were getting together, discussing the theme that Adriana spoke about, that the work is work and is not recognized as work, but yet, our system of government didn't want to give them the right to bargain. And so when I think of the feminist agenda, I thought of them right away, of our childcare workers who received the right to collective bargain a couple of years ago, thanks to legislation that UDW and SEIU was able to pass in California to give them the right to collective bargaining, right? And with that, we were able to organize 40,000 childcare workers into our local. To me, as a mother who has needed childcare before, right? Those are topics that are important to women, and also other topics that we always talk about equal pay for equal work, just feminist topics, that have to do with labor. It's important that we participate in the organizations that are going to give us those rights. And if you're part of a union, then you get equal pay for equal work, because everybody gets paid the same for whatever position, as long as you have a contract. And so for our childcare members, it was important to get the right to bargain collectively and obtain those rights. Recognize that they're workers, being able to negotiate for wages, being able to fight for better things. We've been representing home care providers that take care of elderly and disabled at home. And I've spoken at panels where Adriana has invited me to. In other countries might think, well, that's a union in the United States. They got it made. They're organized. They got everything. But just about 10 years ago, home care workers received the right to overtime, even though they're working long hours. And now we face the threat of that being taken away with just one decision by our current president, right? And so those are the type of things, basic worker rights that we're constantly fighting about. We are, like the hotel workers, a union of mostly women. And I don't want to repeat what Adriana said, but she said it best. We fight for the care agenda, which is invest in care. It's that simple. Invest in care. And in the United States, particularly in California, we are constantly, going to Sacramento, speaking to our representatives and saying, invest in care, right? Because it's not about just us as care workers, but about everyone, because like it was said earlier, care affects everyone. We are gonna need care at some point, either ourselves or we're gonna have to provide care, right? To children, we have elderly, we have care needs, and that's a fundamental need and a fundamental right to have and receive care. So we are constantly fighting for legislation. And I just wanted to highlight the example of overtime, something that we are preparing to defend, right? Not so much to obtain, but it took us years and years to get, and now we are facing that. Also, our campaign this year in California is to push for, to bargain with the state, because currently we negotiate with every county. 50 counties in California is hard to bargain. It's done intentionally to dilute our power. And so we intentionally, along with SEIU 2015, our counterpart, are pushing to negotiate at the state level, where collectively we would have more power. So that's our main priority this year. And we believe that is about advancing not just workers' rights, women's rights, because for all the reasons that have been said.
Yeah, and I think what really resonates in what everything we've been hearing is how much women have been able to claim power, base build, change narrative, change laws. And just as you were saying about overtime, we're in one of the most dangerous political climates we probably haven't seen in decades, and an administration that is very focused on othering us again, pushing people of color, women, LGBTQ workers, folks who have centered themselves back out into the margins. So if you could share a little bit, with these intensified attacks on working people, on immigrants, on women, how are your organizations thinking about this? Like, are we in a defensive pause? Can we move to an offensive strategy? What lessons have we learned from the past organizing under hostile conditions, and the fact that for a long time we were in informal sectors and had to operate outside of the structure?
When we look at that's where I'm going to bring history. It's not the first time that we're facing this, and certainly not in other, I grew up, I was born and raised in dictatorship times, and the domestic workers' unions have been there in the 1930s, and many of them have survived dictatorships and have survived neoliberal policies, very, very harshly, imposed. And so I think when I think of domestic workers organizing also, we see that they didn't have the very basics of what the rest of the working class has. But the resistance and the organizing that they have been doing is being able to survive that, and just to keep it sometimes at the defensive. And it changes depending on the context, but I am reflecting, for example, in Brazil, in the in the times of Bolsonaro, which was the equivalent of Trump, and the majority of the domestic workers in Brazil are black, and Bolsonaro was against, same as here, against black people, indigenous people, and they were really just mobilizing the base more than ever, and that helped a lot to instigate a really good discussions about what is it that we're not doing, what is it what we have done wrong, making the connections and learning about why is it that the working class has been democratically electing these people. And so that I was when Bolsonaro won in Brazil, and we were crying with the workers because we all knew, but also it was a reflection because many black domestic workers voted for Bolsonaro. And so the leaders, they were saying, what we have done, they were crying, what we have done, or what we have not done. And I certainly think that these moments are to reflect, to learn. What is it what we're not reading? What is it we're not mobilizing for and around? And then is instigating and keep organizing, because as soon as people know that what they are about, and I think by now, by a month and a little bit here in the United States, I think everybody knows what Trump and Musk are about. I think this is the moment, to go back and unions like mobilizing as quick as possible, but reading and really learning. And now Brazil is in another stage. Lula is back in power, so there is kind of like a honeymoon, and that's how the pendulum goes. All right, if we look at the history, this is how the pendulum goes, but what we can learn from this pendulum. And for the domestic workers, they have been there, know that, and I think is really reading what probably, I don't know, other sectors of the organized labor are not reading, but in our membership, it's really the ones that are at the bottom of the bottom. So what kind of intervention or how we need to be there, and what kind of how unions and leaders are equipped to read and interpret reality and the momentum, because they are the ones that then can help to bring people together again. I think this is what I think it means, at least for our sector, to organize in times of fascism. And it's not the first time that we're facing that. I'll leave it there. I really want to hear from.
Well, I agree. I mean, this is pro-billionaire administration that is attacking the working class. And it is very true that through history, unions have been made drastic change. One of the biggest mistakes is that the Democratic Party doesn't carry the worker message. As a union representative, I want to say that we need to put workers in positions of power, political power, because when we allow non-workers to carry a message, our issues get lost. It is sickening to see how hatred gain the popular vote, the vote of the poor, the vote of the worker, when we should have had workers speaking on that issue, and we didn't. One thing that our union, started doing is putting our workers in positions of power. Getting city council members of LA, Hugo Soto, he was a houseman at one of our hotels. We put him in power in Arizona. A housekeeper from Century Plaza Hotel is in Arizona as a city council woman. We need to do that. The minute we allow non-workers to speak for those issues, it's defeat. There's a lot to learn. One beautiful thing I see in LA, and I'm so blessed to be in LA, is that there's so much energy. It is sad to see that in moments like this is when all the groups get together and we say, hey, we're here. We built that solidarity, and so that's one thing that we have going, and we know how to organize, we know how to fight. And I think it's leaning towards every group, right, to change the path that this country's taken.
Yeah, I want to explain something. The reason I mentioned earlier that our overtime is at stake because of the current president, we know that this administration, and whether it's not on our side, but there's a larger problem for us, and that is the entire threat to public services, the entire threat to particularly Medicaid for us. Mm-hmm. The services that we provide are funded by Medicaid. And what I want to highlight is that is intentionally being done to weaken unions. Make no mistake about it. The laying off of federal workers right away and weakening these federal and state and funding is intentionally trying to target public sector unions like mine. And if we get weaker, everybody gets weaker. We are getting too powerful for their comfort, right? And although we know we're not powerful enough yet to fight back, we have reached a point where we were a threat, and so that's why all this is happening. And when like everyone, our union has been reflected in the last few months a lot. But we have come to a point where we did say we can't just be on defense. And the best way that we have always, and we have survived similar attacks a few years ago when we had the current president be president the first time. And so we knew what was coming, we knew how we did it, and we did it by organizing. We are, in our local, we are, you could say we're already organized in the sense we are part of organized labor, but we are constantly organizing internally and recruiting new members. I mean, just in the last month we recruited 3,000, and last year 30,000. And so for us, in how we've survived threats to our dues collection process, threats to our collective bargaining rights, threats to the funding of the program that gives us work, is by talking to more and more of our peers and speaking like I am right now to everyone about what it means what is at stake and why we need to do something about it, and not just do something about it as individuals, but collectively. So that's what we are doing. Our parent local AFSCME, which is the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, has just launched the Get Organized campaign with a very intentional focus on growing our union and not get distracted by the defense approach, right? We are mobilizing. We are defending ourselves, but we're also organizing and not just spreading the message, but having those constant conversations with not just other workers like us, but other unions, other partners to do what we always do and just keep empowering workers.
Thank you. That's very hopeful. Just going back to the base is that you organize, and organize in the face of these huge attacks. I'm gonna do a question. If you could respond quickly, because I want to then open it up to the audience for questions. But there's things we can control, and there's things that are getting out of control, and climate disasters is one of those. And of course, LA fires, we really felt it. Domestic workers were at the front lines in terms of both being impacted, losing work, working in the Palisades, day laborers coming in to having to clean, just what a worker issue it is. So if you all could just reflect a little bit about this intersection of environmental rights and justice with labor rights, and how do we integrate climate resilience into a broader care agenda?
I have two examples. In the industry that we represent, there's beautiful resorts in the coastline. Terranea Resort, it's beautiful. It's non-regulated. Like these multi-billionaires, mostly Republicans, owned the property. They profit from this beautiful coastal zone, and they do absolutely nothing to care for it. We put forward an initiative in Palos Verdes to protect the land, beautiful land. Rancho Palos Verdes has traditionally been Republican. It was very difficult to win. We spent we spent $30,000 on that ballot initiative to protect the land. They spent 100,000 or more, and we lost. That's one, you know, so in this industry, coastal zone, we need to protect it. We're working with, those are issues that are important to our members, and we're engaging in that. And the housing. Housing, I mean, these fires just highlighted the need for housing for everyone, and including workers. And so, you know, same thing. We're pushing to create a housing fund for workers through our union.
Yeah, I'll just quickly explain how UDW organizes internally. And that's important because I'll provide one example, but we are so massive throughout California that we organize around issues through our council structure. So we have a political council, health and welfare, and civil and human rights council. And either through the Health and Welfare Council or the Civil and Human Rights, our members gather because we work from home, so we gotta find space either around an issue or a physical space in our area meetings to come together, talk about issues. In the Central Valley, I'll give that example. Our Health and Welfare Council and Civil and Human Rights Councils are been talking about for years now about the contamination of the air and the water. There are pesticides being sprayed that we know are causing cancer in areas near schools, in the communities where our members live. So that's how we organize. We come together, talk about, obviously, our wages and benefits like other unions, but we really talk about many issues, and one of them is the environment and our communities and what affects us. So that's the example I like to provide. There are many, but I'll be around if you want to talk about other parts of the state and what UDW is working on.
In IDWF, we think on the intersection of climate care and migration. And climate care and migration brings so many agendas that are sometimes disconnected. In terms of climate and care, migration, I mean, especially in Latin America, I think it's where the conversations of care are taking place more and more because of the feminist movement in Latin America, and they frame it not only about what I think it's called the care economy, what the economy should give, how care provides or supports economy. That's one way of looking at things, right? But the feminists are thinking in Latin America, no, let's think how the economy can do and provide for care. And in that sense, it's flipping the conversation around the social reorganization of care, which means also the financing. How do we prioritize financing? Why? And I think here in LA was very clearly the budgeting, how much it goes to the police, and how much it goes to climate action, how much it goes to care systems, nothing, right? So it's like when we think in the social organization of care, it gives us a framework for action. And it gives us also a philosophy where we are prioritizing a caring society instead of thinking on the care economy, which is basically the consequences of with this extractive economic model. That's what's causing climate change. And so if we flip the conversation and think on what about if we prioritize or reorganize society around care and not around economic exploitation, then you have a framework for action and you have a philosophy. If we think on care as a need, on care as a job, and care as a right, then you will have changing social protection securities. You will have public investment on care. You will have different financing. You will have social security. And that is what I think it can help to bring a different perspective on how these two go together. And migration. I mean, there are 13 million migrant domestic workers, and this is because There are no national care systems in countries in the global north or in the MENA region, but also because of climate change, people have to push and leave their countries because of economic necessity. So these things go together, and I think it's how do we bring them together around a different paradigm where life and economy is organized around care, and that is a feminist labor agenda.